pleasure of being joined by artist William Rhodes. Mr. William Rhodes was born in 1966 in Baltimore, Maryland. He is the co-founder of 3.9 Art Collective. He attended the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, in which he focused in furniture design. He also attended the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in which he also majored in furniture design. His great selection of works have been collected and are included in institutions like the Smithsonian Institute for the Smithsonian Institute's National Museum of African American History and Culture, the Timmy Stalling Design Collection, Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland African American History and Culture, the Meredith Gallery, and so many others. He is currently with Bayview Senior Services, where he acts as the Intergenerational Program Director. In recent months, he has released a collaborative art book project with the artist Ben F. Jones. Mr. William Rhodes, I want to thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to our conversation where we are going to deep dive into your experience growing up in Baltimore, Maryland, your art, and your thoughts on the future of Black art. William Rhodes, thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the great introduction, too.
Absolutely. Well, let's start there. 1966, Baltimore, Maryland. I am also a native Washingtonian, and I grew up in Southern Maryland. So the next major metropolis from where I grew up is Washington, D.C. My father had a sister who attended Morgan State University. And when she attended that school, she made Baltimore her home. Both of them grew up in Prince George's County, Maryland. But again, when she attended Morgan State, she made Baltimore her home, where she reared 3 children with her husband. And I just remember jumping in that Honda Accord with my parents in the summer and taking those road trips, because at that time, being a kid, the distance between Southern Maryland and Baltimore it just felt like a long ride. So we would take those 1-hour trips on up Baltimore, Washington, and I just remember entering the city. First off, I'm used to 93.9 WKYS and 96.3 WHUR and 95.5 WPGC, and the music that we would, listen to there sometimes was, go-go music on those stations. But those frequencies would go out, and then we would hit the 92.3 zone, in which we would hear Baltimore house music. So in addition to the music and the sound of Baltimore, Maryland, the architecture, the landscape design, Greek revival is a big presence in Baltimore, Maryland. Maryland was also an industrial town. So, you saw the Domino Sugar Factory as soon as you pulled into town. The city has a wonderful mystique. And I'm speaking from it as an outsider. So I would love for you to tell me about the culture and just the feeling and the vibrations of Baltimore, Maryland, for you growing up there as a child, again, born in 1966 in Baltimore, Maryland. Tell me about that, William.
Well, first, you have a great memory, Sophie. You have a better memory than me, and you're bringing me back. Baltimore, it was an amazing place, very fascinating for me. So being born in the 60s, of course, I was very young, so I missed a lot of the issues with the civil rights movement. But just keep in mind, as a child, children pick up so much. And I knew that there was so much going on. I mean, great things, a time of optimism with people really pushing for rights of Black people and particularly Black people in the cities and communities. But also was a time of a lot of civil unrest, and I could feel it. I mean, it was in the air. So it really impacted a lot of things that happened in the city. Yes, you made a good point. Baltimore was a blue collar town. So we're talking hardworking people used to working in factories, doing really, hard work. And all of a sudden, then you mix in with the civil rights and activism taking place. So it was very explosive. And in my household, my father was involved with the civil rights movement. He was involved, he had a magazine at the time, which really dealt with a lot of issues in the Black community. So there would be people coming through my house as a child that were really in the movement. I mean, heavily in the movement and traveling all over the country with different organizations and people that were connected with, the movements of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, et cetera. So all of those things were taking place at that time. But at the same time, I still had my family. So my family they were my protection from some of the crazy things that were happening. And they also would still bring aspects of the South. So I came from a traditional household. I had grandparents, great grandparents around. My mother and father were in the home, and it was still like family dinners. You sat together, you ate together, you shared stories together. Cousins would come around, so it still was that strong family unit that took place.
Amazing, amazing. And I want to, talk about your family because in your bio you make some, some very great references to your Native American grandmother as well as your grandfather. But you mentioned that civil rights. You were born pretty much after that whole movement, and your family in some ways protected you from experiencing some of the social hardships that were going on around town. But I know that you experienced some things, and that is what introduced you to the world of art, because that was a way for you to express yourself, and that eventually led you to the Baltimore School of Arts, or School for the Arts. Before we go there, let's just
Mhm.
go back to the roots. Native American grandmother. Are you familiar with the tribe that she's from, and have you traveled to those native lands?
So yeah, so my grandmother, yes, she's Cherokee. And I did not actually go to their actual location, the exact location, but I traveled through. They were from parts of North Carolina. So I did travel there, and I had some relatives that were Native American that lived outside of that area, actually living in the Southwest area. So I didn't physically go to any of the actual tribal lands, but definitely had all of that really understanding. And my grandmother, my great grandmother in particular, would share a lot of the stories of the history and just her knowledge of really nature and the connection between humans and nature and the importance of that.
Oh yes, oh yes. The Native Americans, had a deep appreciation and a connection to the land, and I was just reading about that in recent months, and there's a practice that they used to do with the colonizers, in which they would do something called enter the woods. And basically what that entailed is that anytime somebody was traveling from another part of the country and meeting up to conduct treaty business or what have you, they would do some traditional Native American practices to clear themselves of all of that energy that had been taken in, because they definitely thought spirits, and embraced the idea that spirits existed in those spaces.
Hmm.
Speaking of spirits, your grandfather, had an ability to communicate with spirits. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, yeah, my grandfather. So both my great grandmother, my grandmother, and my grandfather all, had this connection with nature and the land. But my grandfather, he was born, the story goes, he was born with a veil. They call it a Venetian veil. I don't know if that may be a very old term, but it's like a skin or flap of skin or something supposedly born over your eyes. And that is a sign that this child who's born has this ability. So my grandfather told me that's what his parents told him, that he was born with this. So he, at an early age, would see all of these spirits. When his father died when he was very young, and his father was really sick. He was on his deathbed, and my grandfather remembers as a child they were walking up to the house. His mother and him and his brother had gone to the market to get food. The father was in the bed with the doctor. He was, really he was fighting for his life. And my grandfather said when he walked to the house, he saw his father at the front gate, and his father was opened the gate and walked out. And he was like, said to his brother, he's like, man, why, I thought daddy was sick. Why is he out of bed? And they went into the house and his father was dead. So he had seen the spirit of his father. So that was the first of many things. My grandfather also, and I don't want to take the story to another direction, but my grandfather also would tell stories of the hardships that they had. So they grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana. And in that town, he worked at an early age with Madam C.J. Walker when she first started her company. And she was a part of the church, and Madam C.J. Walker was the girlfriend, close, good friend, best friend of his mother, which is my great great grandmother. So they were all friends connected in the church. And my grandfather told me that there were times that Madam C.J. Walker would help them and the community would help them, but there were times that they really would not have money. Sometimes they didn't have money for food. And it was my grandfather, his brother, and of course, my great grandmother. And he remembers that when they had some really hard times, times where they didn't have enough money for food, clothing, etc., he would hear these knocks on the wall. And he said it would sound like something was in the wall itself, and it would scare him. And him and his brother both would hear these bangings. And at one point, it was so loud that they ran into their mother's room, and the mother held them and said, "Hey, don't worry, don't get scared." And they were like, "What is that noise? What is this banging?" And they would say, "It's your father. It's your father. He's looking out for us." And it seemed like whenever they would hear those knockings in the wall or the banging in the house, good fortune would come. It would be, somebody would give them money or something would open up for them. And he said on several occasions this practice took place, which is, very unexplained. The last and I don't, again, I don't want to take up our whole time with me telling stories what my grandfather shared with me, but there were times that he had to take, my grandfather worked many jobs trying to survive, trying to make it. One of the jobs that he took was as a chauffeur and kind of a groundskeeper of these wealthy white people that lived in Maryland. And they would not allow him, we're talking like the 1930s, 40s. So they wouldn't allow him to actually stay in the house. So they put him, they had a huge plot of land that had a wooded area, and they had a shack. Basically, it was a shack where they kept tools, and it was also a smokehouse right next to the shack. So my grandfather had to stay in the shack, and he said in the wintertime it would be freezing. And he's in there, and he said on several occasions, particularly in the spring and summertime, he would wake up or hear this ringing of an axe, and it would just happen, early in the morning, and it was like somebody was just chopping wood in the woods. And he would, try to find who has this axe, who is chopping wood, and he would constantly hear this ringing. And then he talked about on different occasions, it was like somebody was walking around the shack that he stayed. Person would be humming and singing, and he would hear a woman's voice as if they were doing work or whatever. And he would jump out, he'd immediately jump out of bed, open the door to try to spring and catch the person. He couldn't find the person. And this would go on. This went on for months. He eventually found out that that whole area was an area where slaves had been. So the people that my grandfather had worked for, their ancestors had slaves, and they kept them in that same area. So my grandfather somehow, you know, connected with these spirits, and he felt like they were looking out for him. So, again, these are several stories. I said I wasn't going to share one, but I'm going to share anymore, but I'm going to share one more. So the area where my grandfather was, I don't know if anyone who's listening, if they're from the Maryland area, there's a place called the Cloisters Children's Museum. This is where my grandfather did the work. And this was right next to it. It wasn't at the Cloisters Museum. The Cloisters Children's Museum was an old castle which a wealthy person put on this piece of land. But right in that same area is where my grandfather worked for these wealthy people. And on another occasion, he talked about there would be this dog, a small animal that looked like a puppy or a small dog. And he would see this thing running, and it would be running through the woods or running on a road. And as it started to run, it started to get bigger and bigger. And it grew to a size of like a cow or a bull. And it actually grew horns. And it would run. And then on one occasion, he remembers seeing it pass through a picket fence where you could easily see through the fence. And it would pass through and it would disappear. And he saw this on several occasions. Now, why I bring this story up is because when I spent time, I travel a lot, and I spent time in parts of Africa, West Africa, in Senegal, Cape Verde Islands, and I started to interview people about their legends and their stories, and I was fascinated to find out that in one of their legends, they have an exact description of what my grandfather saw with this small dog. So I just was this it really confirmed a lot of things for me when I heard that story. And I talked to several older people in Cape Verde, and they shared with me the story of this dog turning into this bull and what it symbolized. So I was just amazed by that. So yeah, that's some of the stories. Again, I could talk for hours about the things my grandfather experienced, but that's just some of the stories.
And that's something I would love to, do with you and others, because, that conversation of, seeing the other side is, I think, is totally necessary. I relate to it from personal experience, and I appreciate, you sharing that with us today, because I know, your family and some of the experiences and the stories that have been passed down has been very influential on your work. There was one particular incident that occurred with one of your cousins, a
Hmm.
cross burning, and this, to my
Yes.
understanding, was the spark that formed William Rhodes, the artist. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, great question. So you said the spark, and I love what you just said. So this is amazing. At the time of when it happened, I was only 13. I didn't, I suppressed it. I didn't really think much about it, partially because I was young. I didn't really have total understanding. And my immediate family did not share a lot of stuff with me about it. This was something we did not talk about. Only until I became older, I got deeper into my art. It's like this unconscious thing started to come up and find its way into my work. So in essence, I was 13. My family, We are living in Baltimore, wanted to support my cousin, who was the first valedictorian of her high school, a first black female valedictorian of her high school. And this is in Virginia. And she had perfect honor roll. Her grades were impeccable. And the school itself did not want her to speak or to have the privilege of giving the valedictorian speech. So they tried to prevent that. And so there was a series of things that took place where they first said that she had bad attendance. Well, my aunt, which is her mother, kept every single report card and record from the beginning of her school year. So when the school said she couldn't be a valedictorian because she didn't have good attendance, my aunt went in and proved that they were wrong. So then they had to change it. So this led to it getting closer to graduation. So my family, we get in the car, we drive to Virginia. This is this happy celebration because of my cousin's achievement. And we're there. And the what we didn't understand is they had been a series of people complaining about her being the first black valedictorian. And there've been death threats and even bomb threats, which I didn't know. I don't even know if my family knew all of the details completely. My family that we drove up from Baltimore, I don't know if we knew everything. But when we got there, before the graduation, there was on my uncle's land, someone had set a cross or something on fire on that land. Now, I say that because I did not get to go outside and see it or be involved. When it happened, my family immediately, told me, go back to bed, don't worry about it, just keep it moving. And you're 13 years old, you're curious, you want to know what's happening. But the adults handle whatever the situation was. But this is something, again, we didn't talk about. So years later, I asked the question about this and found out more of the details. And the details were that number one, I was not allowed to go to the graduation because of fear that something bad would happen, because my cousin and her family were determined for her to make that speech. So my uncle went, and my aunt and my family, and they went and they sat in the front to protect her. While she gave her speech, I was told that the school turned off the sound. So she spoke, but no one could hear it. But she stood as a symbol. She still was the first black valedictorian. And so they couldn't deny that. And again, these are details that I've started to hear more and more over time. And I actually talked to my cousin, and she shared with me really a lot of the things that took place. And the positive is it really pushed her to be a person who really fought even for the rights of people. She got involved with black student unions, forming black student unions when she went to college. She became even more academic and pushed even harder and became one of the head nurses in her division in Virginia. So she had great achievement as a result of that. But she just never forgot and really knew the impact of what this event had on the family and how it really made them determined to really get out there and speak and be a person that would stand for the rights of other people.
Mm, and and this again, you're born in '66, so I mean, roughly this is happening in the '70s. You know.
Yeah, deep in the 70s, like 70s, what was it? 7, 78, 79, like 79 or something like that. I was 13, so yeah,
Post.
78.
Mm-hmm. And this is post, civil rights act, you know, and in the United States is still, at that time struggling with um, race relations, and
Absolutely.
it's enough to, as you stated in your bio, it's enough to make you, angry and sad. And, I didn't realize I said spark in relation to a cross burning, but
Yes.
now I'm seeing the connection. And what's beautiful is the ember of you and what you've become because of incidents like that. Because you again state in your bio that you went to art as a way to express your sadness and anger. So tell me about your formative years as a traditional artist. I would think it's safe to say that it starts at Baltimore School for the Arts. So can you tell me about your experience at that institution?
Yes, yeah. Well, to be honest, it started before, but I'm going to go into School for the Arts. But it started before because, art became a way for me to heal. I was, growing up in Baltimore, again, we're talking about so much unrest that was taking place during that time. Political, social, all of the stuff was taking place. And I experienced that as, when I was younger going to school. I dealt with bullying. There was no real term, for that. Like the good thing is now there are actually laws and things really working on that. But I really dealt with those issues around being bullied and having really to fight quite a bit. And that was very hard for me. And I was very small. I was kind of the runt of the neighborhood, but I wanted to be an athlete and I wanted to really compete with the big boys in sports. And that would often lead me into getting injured. And sometimes, I would have attacks from people, for various reasons, physical attacks, having your nose broken, having things happen, it got to be pretty intense. So, I found that when I would spend my time in my room drawing, I started to feel more empowered. I started to create superheroes or characters. And really, I was really drawing myself, not realizing that it was self portraits. I would do these portraits of myself in powerful positions, where I could be that super person or that athlete. And I could be a person that could stand up and handle myself. That art gave me that ability and I could control it and it felt great. When I got out on the streets, I, didn't always have the control that I wanted. And I'm an only child too. So it made it a little bit harder. And I'm sure there are plenty of people in the world that could identify with that. So let's go into School for the Arts. So I lived in a community where, you had zone schools. And at that time, we're talking the crack epidemic, started to really, just kind of speed up. It was the first time this crazy drug was pouring into the community. So we're talking communities overnight that were working class, blue collar communities. Everybody worked. Father stay at home, mom, father working, or sometimes two parents working, but two parents in the home. All of a sudden gets transformed into this whole crack horror show that we've read about or talk about now. So it started to impact a lot of things. So the schools in my neighborhood really started to change, and some of those schools got so bad that they actually had to have metal detectors in the schools. So I knew if I went to a zone school, I was going to end up going to a school that was pretty rough. And my personality, being an artist and a creative, I knew I would have to fight every day. And that made me sick. The thought of that, to have to constantly be battling every single day. So I literally prayed that I would get into the school for the arts. And I prayed and I auditioned. And I really didn't know if I was going to do it. My chances were slim. It was a lot of people applying. The school had just I think it was the school had just opened up, so I was the second class to come in. So it was this great big experiment in Baltimore. And I went after it, and there were hundreds and hundreds of people around the city that were applying, and it was only a few slots. So I felt like if I could get in this school, it would be like winning the lottery. And the blessings came, and I got that letter, and found out that you were accepted in the Baltimore School for the Arts. And that's how I ended up there. And it was for me when I first got there, I'm this young, bright-eyed person, never really been in an artistic environment. And it was a lot. It was a lot. I mean, seeing dancers and theater people and musicians and artists, and everybody's caught up in their craft. At the time, it was very free at the school. They would allow us to leave for our lunch breaks. We can go and explore the city as long as we're back at a certain time. We would have longer school days than other people because we would have studio hours tacked into our school day. So it felt very free compared to other schools. We had models. Sometimes we would have live nude models. All of this was like just cutting edge for me and cutting edge for, Baltimore at that time. It felt in many ways, as if it was almost like early college stuff. It kind of prepared me for college and gave me that feeling, that freedom and everything else. It had its good and it had its bad sides. But as far as the good sides go, I mean, I definitely say that was just it changed me in so many ways and really put me on a track to be a serious artist.
Wow, that sounds provocative, William. You listen. You went from potentially and potentially, and this is not to clown any demographic, but it was like it was like a tone of that whole free Mr. Clark situation, and then it was like the
Yes.
tone of fame, and just having that that whole like that art experience, and it's just it's wonderful that it worked out for you like that. Do you recall what you submitted for to testing and to be selected? What kind of artwork did you submit for your
Yeah.
selection?
Yeah, I had a really good middle school teacher, and Mr. Schuster, and he suggested that and also my dad helped me tremendously what I should do. So I did self portraits. I had a series of self portraits that I did. I had a series of drawings from life. So I went out, and my father would take me to the park, and I would draw, landscapes. We would also do still life, set things up in the house. My father would buy flowers or buy certain things and set it up on a table with a tablecloth. And I did these drawings, life drawings, things like that. I would do figure drawings. So it was a mix of all of these types of drawings that were in my portfolio, that I submitted. And I had it matted really well. And I had it in such a way so I felt like it was extremely professional for me at the time. And I guess it worked.
Yes, William, and that that right there is something I notice about your work is you have a lot of different entry points to art. You quilt, you do sculpture, um, paintings, and I see again, as I mentioned in the earlier part of the interview, you attended the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, as well as the
Mm.
University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. And in both cases, you pursued furniture design. As an African American man, I guess I would say you are probably a rarity within that art form. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But
No.
yeah, also tell me, how did you land on, okay, this is the type of art that I'm going to pursue in my college experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, when I went in, my family, they were very supportive of me being an artist, but everybody said you got to make a living when you get out. And I'm sure so many people still hear that story. So at the time, the areas where people could make money as an artist was, graphic design, or they call it commercial art, architecture, and design work. And industrial design was the new hot, sexy thing. So I said, okay, I want to be an industrial designer. You know, industrial designers were people that would design cars. Like at the time, there was a guy named DeLorean who designed the DeLorean car. He was like big in the news, you know, and he was an industrial designer that designed cars, product design, all of those things. So I said, okay, well, you know what? They make good money. It's artistic. Let me learn how to be an industrial designer. So I went to school and got in, took all my, early, education classes, and then was able to, my second year chose a major. And I did industrial design. And the first semester, number one, I was up almost seemed like every two out of an entire week, it would be 2 days out of the whole week that I was always guaranteed to stay up all night finishing projects. So I was like not getting much sleep. And it was so technical and so much about math and detail oriented things that I personally, given my personality, I felt like I was starting to lose my artistic touch and my expression. So I did it and I continued to try to push through it. But I was like, man, this is like burning me out. This, it just doesn't feel right for me. And one day I took an elective while I was still, still majoring in industrial design. And the elective was furniture making. And it was a small department, and this is in Philadelphia, small department. And I found myself always down there. And I started to get more into the furniture than my actual major. You know, I was just enjoying working on this furniture, all these different woods, just the beautiful texture of the woods, how it would smell when you cut it and how it would look when you put it together and put oil on it. I mean, it was exciting to me. So I'm at the head of the furniture department. He said to me, he said his name is Michael Horowitz at the time. He said, why don't you switch your major to something that you really love? So I thought about it and talked to my family, and my family said, hey, I don't know how much money you're gonna make making furniture, but if you're that unhappy with industrial design, you go with what you go with. And so then I switched and became a furniture design major. And then the process has just pretty much continued. And it evolved into where I am right now. But it definitely was the foundation for a lot of my sculptural pieces and the work that I currently do right now.
Mm, mm. And kudos and much love to your family for supporting that transition and your whole mission and desire to be an artist. That's not always the case. So, you know,
Yeah,
big ups to mom and dad and all those good people that were surrounding you. And your ancestral your ancestral roots and then your upbringing is heavily represented in your artwork. And I guess an example of that would be um, again the incident with what happened with your cousin. There's a piece called "Onward, Christian Soldier." So
yeah.
can you tell me a little bit about these specific artworks and give me a description of what what narratives are in the art pieces and how you came to these narratives? Just a few.
Yeah. So well, first, do you mind if I describe the piece slightly for the viewers that may not know what it looks like?
Absolutely. If you want, give me the name of it, a description,
Hmm.
and then you know refer to the question, and I will also accompany the interview with images of the pieces that you're talking about.
Thank you. So Onward Christian Soldier is the name of the piece. It's a piece that reminds you of an old sign from the South. It's cut in the shape of, it has zigzag edges all around. It looks like flames, but then in the center of it is a cutout of a cross. And on each side of the cross, there is a drawing. One drawing is of a church woman who's a deaconess. And on the other side of the cross, there's a drawing of a Ku Klux Klan member. Both of them on their robes have a cross on it. And I also went in and did needle and thread work that connects the cross. So in both of them with the cross on their robes, I hand sewed red needle and thread and then tied the thread together so that these two, the clan member and the church lady, have a connection. And on the top, I have a neon, actually used neon glass, which is on the top of the piece. And that actually lights up. It gives off a really bright, luminous light that says soldier. So I wanted to describe the piece because, first, just based on the look of the piece, it ties, for me, it was very important to really tie it in with my roots, with my family roots, growing up in the South, being from Baltimore, but always, going down every summer, visiting my family in the South, spending time with them and seeing these things unconsciously, not necessarily paying attention to them, but they were packed away in my mind, old like pieces of wood that people would take and cut and shape into something or use as a sign to describe something. I wanted it to have that feel. So it looks like old wood. It's painted white, it's cracked in places. It looks like an old sign. So I wanted it to have that kind of folk tradition. Um, and I want to also talk about, what a person who has inspired me to continue that is an artist by the name of Anthony McKissick. Because when he saw some of my early pieces that I was using found woods and scraps and creating this kind of folk tradition, he would encourage me so often. He's like, man, tap deeper, tap into that family stuff, tap into those things. And, often I feel with many African Americans, not all, but some African Americans now, we're so focused on moving forward and being a part of this new world and the technology and everything else, that sometimes there's a certain amount of shame that's attached to our roots. There's a certain amount of shame talking about our ancestors and the fact that they had to take scraps of wood and use it to build things, and the fact that they had to take scraps of whatever and create. There's a certain amount of shame in that. Now, that's not for everyone, but I noticed that. And so now I'm really, with my work, I want to make sure I embrace that and know that this is a part of me. So I'm going back to the piece. I'm sorry I went on a segue, but so this piece, Onward Christian Soldiers, the basic narrative of the piece is talking about these two elements, this church lady and this clan member. Now, the church lady, when I was a child growing up, there would be women marching down the aisle. They would sometimes have white robes on with an embroidered cross, and they would march. They'd have their white gloves, and they would be like ushers or deaconess in the churches, and they would march down the aisles. And I remember them singing on some occasions, "Onward, Christian soldiers, onward." So that really image stuck in my mind because they would talk about in the Bible that they are Christian soldiers. They are fighting for Christ, against the evil of the world. Now let's flip to the other side of my artwork. We have the clan member. The clan member has a cross on their robe, and they classify themselves as Christian soldiers. Now, through the burning of things and through the flame, in their minds, this is a purification of what is evil. So often, like the story of my cousin going on my family's property, on their property, and burning a cross, in their minds, they felt like they were cleansing cleansing the environment of the evil of my cousin being the first Black valedictorian. So when you think about this mindset, to me, I mean, it's really bizarre, but you're talking people that are both defining themselves as Christian. And when you think about religion, people can, and my belief is people can take that religion and use it in any way they want to define or justify their behaviors. And they can be extremely passionate about it and feel like they're extremely right. But at the end of the day, it's not, many times there's no accountability for the destruction that it can bring. So this piece, I really wanted that to really stand out. And I've had many people, when it's been in several, I was in a museum show in California, Northern California, And I had several people look at this piece and started to cry when they saw it. And I realized the emotional impact that this piece has on some people. So, so I wanted to really bring that out and really make that clear to people. And with that neon, that big neon soldier at the top, even if you don't like the piece, there is no way you can escape that neon because, like, humans are like moths. We are drawn to flames. So if we see something that lights up in a space, we may not even like it, but many times we find ourselves being drawn to it. So this piece can draw people in. So that was really my intent when I created this piece. And it's about uh, close to 6 feet tall, I think. I don't have the exact measurements, but it's a pretty substantial piece.
Oh goodness, this is why I love artist talkbacks because something I would like to do in the near future is take an art interpretation class because there's a lot of messages that I miss in looking
Hmm.
at the artwork, and I mean, for example, the spool of thread in the center.
Yeah.
I didn't make the connection that that spool of thread is leading up to the embroidered crosses on their respective shirts,
Hmm.
and that's the connection. That's major, William. Let me also have you tell me about this beautiful piece called "Falsehood: The Last Patron Saint of the Bayview," produced in
Yes.
2013. What's that all about?
Yes. Yes. It's so funny. I laugh when I think about the piece. So, when I moved to San Francisco, I moved here 2008. I was new to the community, and one of the areas where I first got my first job, I got a job working as an art teacher for after school programs. So I came in, and it was a community called the Bayview Hunters Point neighborhood. So it's the last, what you would consider, African American community in San Francisco because through gentrification, the black population has just been decimated. So imagine this one small, what you would call a black neighborhood in San Francisco. So I'm going to work, and as I would drive, there was always this one light that would stop me. And I had to stop at this light and wait for it to change so I could it was a left turn I had to make. And it was every time I got to work, there was this guy. And, I don't know if he was drunk, whatever, but this guy was African American guy, and he would be yelling and be on the center strip right where you turn the light, and he would be giving people a middle finger. And every time, and he looked like he was obviously disheveled. I think he was homeless, but this guy was not happy. But I noticed that the people that he recognized, he never did that to. But he did it to me. He would give me the middle finger. He'd be yelling at anybody. And he one day made a comment, and I don't remember what the words were, but it was basically about outsiders coming into his community. I did not really understand because, again, I'm new to San Francisco at this point. And I slowly began to understand what this guy was doing. So this guy was apparently pushed out or really saw the effects of gentrification, and he was, now he's homeless. And this is a person, he's from the community. And now this person who grew up in this community, had generations of family in this community, now they're homeless. And so that was his way of taking a stand. Now, I'm not saying it was a good way, but his way was like, I'm going to give you the middle finger because you're coming in, you're an outsider coming into my area, and you're pushing the native people or the people that have been here, you're pushing them out. And I got to make a stand. So I never forgot this guy because he was really my first education into understanding the impacts of gentrification and the displacement of African Americans in San Francisco. So he was that education. So I wanted to create an artwork about him. So I produced this piece. It's a drawing. It doesn't look exactly like him because I damn sure couldn't take a picture of him because this guy probably would have thrown a brick through my window. But I remember from the basic details what he looked like and came up with this drawing of this person who's giving you the middle finger. And it's a box, That the shape of it is he's in a box. It has molding from pieces of wood because that community had a lot of old Victorian houses which had the carved molding and the architectural details. So I added different pieces on that box to give it a feel like a house. And then at the bottom, I actually put a shelf which has candles on it. So you can actually light the candles. And I classified him as the patron saint of the Bayview because this man was definitely taking a stand. His feelings were, this is, I'm not buying into what's happening. I'm forced to do this. I'm forced in this position, but I'm going to go out with the fight. You're going to know I'm here. So I classified him as the last patron saint of the Bayview, and this piece was dedicated to him. He never saw the piece, and I since have not seen him. I'm not sure what happened to him, but this piece was dedicated to him.
Oh my goodness, William. That's beautiful, beautiful. Again, you said sadness and anger is what brought you to art, and you allowed his pain to influence this beautiful piece. And making note of the dates are very important. Again, that piece that William just described was produced in 2013. 6 years later, a film by the name of The Last Black Man in San Francisco was
Mm,
produced in 2019. And I'm hearing huge connections between those narratives here, William. So
yes,
thank
you
you.
bringing them out, man. Thank you. You're
Thank
like the psychiatrist bringing out stuff.
Listen to you. I look at all this stuff as like a puzzle pieces and just pulling it all together. And pulling together your artwork, you utilize a number of different materials. You are definitely a mixed media artist. Um,
Hmm.
there's a piece called Gone Mother, in which is described as using photo on fabric, paint,
Hmm.
and neon glass. How do you select your material, and are there any materials that you haven't worked with yet that you plan to do so, or plan to work with in the future?
So, as far as selecting my materials, I usually choose wood because I'm so comfortable with working with wood because of my educational background and the fact that it's a living thing, a living material. And I love that about wood. And I start to really understand the properties of wood. When you're building stuff in wood, you got to respect it. You just can't throw things together and expect it to last because wood will play a game on you. If nature expansion and contraction, that's basically where moisture gets into the wood and it starts to get kind of swell up or shrink. So if you don't build something a certain way, it can fall apart or even bust. Drawers and things like that can actually expand and you'll never get them open if you don't build it a certain way. So wood, you have to respect wood. So that's a chosen material. My other materials tend to just come to me. They choose me. That shoe with Gone Mother was actually, I did an interview of a lady again, from the community, from San Francisco, the Bayview Hunters Point community, who ended up homeless, and who had a house, family, generations of things, but she ended up losing everything. And so that piece was dedicated to her. And that shoe was actually found in the area where I interviewed her. It may have been her shoe, I'm not sure, but it was left. There was a little stoop that she would always stay on, and I haven't seen her either. But she would leave, there would be things left, and this shoe kind of spoke to me. So I took the shoe back and used it and created this piece. As far as working in other mediums, I'd like to, and I haven't really gotten to this yet, but I'd like to maybe learn more about digital aspects of my art, using digital art as a medium. That I'm not really familiar with. If anyone knows me, you know how I have so many issues around technology and really working with that. So I feel like digital art will challenge me because it's so new and so foreign to me that it would probably be like me learning art all over again. So that is definitely a medium that I'd like to challenge myself with in the near future and find out where it goes.
Oh, yes, I cannot wait for that to happen. Tools. Tools. So you have the media, and you talked about working with wood earlier and using oil, and I love how you just said that you have to respect, the wood when doing your woodworks. That to me, I heard your grandmother, as soon as you said that, I'm like, that's that Native American connection to the wood. So
Yes.
yeah, yeah. So what kind of tools are you using to, produce your work?
With the wood pieces, I use a lot of hand power tools. So I use something called a jigsaw. I will take, if I'm building particularly a piece of furniture or a large sculptural piece, I actually draw it out on brown paper or white paper, like butcher block paper, and paste it or lay it on the piece of wood and use it like a pattern. Like if a person if a dressmaker um, would have a pattern and lay it on the fabric and cut it out. Well, I lay that pattern down on the piece of wood that I use and cut it out with a jigsaw, which is a handheld saw. Then I will go back and use a right angle grinder. It's a tool. Some people may be familiar with the seeing grinders if they go to an auto body shop. They'll see somebody, a woman or a man who's working in one of those shops will take one of those grinders and grind the metal on a car, and you'll see the sparks flying. Well, I have something similar, but it's made for wood, and you put sandpaper wheels on it, and it grinds the wood. So you can use that to cut and shape the wood. Also, you can put a small chainsaw wheel on it, which can really cut the wood. You just got to be careful not to cut yourself, but it acts the same way where you're grinding away big chunks of wood to shape the piece. And then I usually go back in with chisels. I have various chisels, some that have scoops, kind of spoon shapes in the front, some that are more square to allow you to carve certain ways or certain directions with it. And then afterwards I go in with files so I can file the wood to get it smoother. And then to get it really smooth, you have to go back with a series of sandpapers. So I start off with a really rough sandpaper. um, it could be 50 grit sandpaper or 80 grit sandpaper or 60. And then I go in, sand it, get to try to get the scratches and the marks out. And then I work my way all the way down to a really fine sandpaper. Um, so it's a whole process. And you could even get it so fine where you can there are sandpapers that you can actually wet and sand the wood with that, and it gets it like really, really fine, really smooth, all the scratches out. But we're talking months in the making. I've made pieces, sculptural pieces, furniture pieces. Some pieces have taken me an entire year to make. So it could be a long process. But in general, that's the tools that I use. And with other things, other types of materials that I work in, with the quilting, obviously needle and thread, fabric, paints, different types of brushes that I use. Um, I also use soil and dirt and things like that in my work too. I know I'm kind of expanding on what you asked me, but so when I travel different places, particularly if I have gone down south or different places where the energy is a certain way, I just came back from South Carolina visiting, doing a project there and going to some plantations. And I actually got some soil from those locations or from that region, small amounts. And I will get that soil and I will mix that soil in a certain way and use it as a pigment for my painting or use it as a way to coat some of my sculpture pieces. I have a technique for mixing things together. I use carbons. I use a lot of different materials in it. Sometimes I use sticks for painting, various things from nature. So it's a big variety of things that I use as far as tools with my art.
So you have the media, the the material that's being used. You have the wonderful tools, but it all starts within William and his experiences and his interpretation of those experiences. You and I had the opportunity. You brought up Anthony McKissick, and
Hmm.
you and I, we had an opportunity to hang out with him at the Chateau in Washington D.C. And I was hanging with him, a few other times, and he was documenting the DC hand dance scene.
Yes.
And that in turn became a published story in the Washington Post called Superfly at DC's Chateau nightclub. And that, yeah, and that is the Chateau is a major cultural institution. And I just heard you make mention of Bayview, an African American community in San Francisco, and then your most recent travels to South Carolina, in which you obtained sticks and soil. Can you just tell me maybe about another two, or yeah, about another two spaces that have really inspired you and has impacted or has influenced your work?
Yes. Definitely traveling abroad too. Um, Traveling through parts of Africa. I had experience of traveling, spending a pretty substantial period of time in Egypt, going into the areas through the Nile, actually traveling on the Nile, and going into different villages, Aswan, and different places that are all more off the beaten path, and seeing this African tradition, which I saw the connection, in these places, and feeling very much at home. Seeing people that look like my grandfather, seeing people that look like my cousins, family members. I mean, identical. And being embraced and feel and them knowing that I was somehow connected with them as well. So that was very important. And seeing, these amazing historical things that were produced by, the Egyptians, and, that are thousands and thousands of years old, and seeing the connection. So that inspired a lot of my work too. These beautiful monumental things, and really not just making art only for the sake of art or to hang in a gallery space, but producing art to have a story connected with your ancestors, connecting with the lineage, connecting with your aspects of nature, really understanding that more and wanting that in the work, something that's greater than me, because many of the Egyptians they talked about, they were vessels for the art. They were vessels for creating these things. It wasn't about them just as individual artists. It was about them producing something, and the spirit of creativity came through them. Well, I'm trying to learn more about that and become more that myself, where I am a vessel for these creations. So I did. So of places, that is definitely a place that influenced and inspired me. Um, Spending time also in Senegal, West Africa, and Cape Verdes. I mentioned that before. Also great influences with my work, and just completely inspiring. There's so many places. I could say India, I could say parts of China. All of those had things that I think I bring into the work somehow and tie it in together. And I have to definitely talk about the South every time. That is definitely a huge connection. And again, I keep bringing up Anthony McKissick. Anthony McKissick, really encouraged me to continue to look into those things and to connect to that, to connect to my roots, to connect to my family from the South, and to be proud of that. I keep bringing this up because, my mother, it was directly from Virginia. And my mother talked about when she came to Baltimore, during that time, we're talking about 50s, early 60s. That was a time where many African Americans coming from the South, they had to really adapt to moving to the cities. And that meant that city people would often make fun of them. They would call them country. There were terms that were used, country, Bama, bumpkin, derogatory terms because they were from the South, because there was a certain amount of shame, because at that point, people in America, particularly many Black Americans, wanted to get away from that narrative of slavery, sharecropping, the farming. They wanted to move away from that. They wanted to move into more of an urban thing. They wanted to move into what is considered more progressiveness. And that is the thing when I talk to Anthony McKissick so often about this, that is one of the dangers. It's important to move forward. But the problem is when you move forward and you turn your back on the past, and there's an expression dealing with the Sankofa bird. The Sankofa bird in Africa is a symbol where in order to move forward, you have to acknowledge and connect with your past. So I think that there is a danger that can happen when people, particularly in the African American community, get so caught up in wanting to progress forward. Everything's about technology. Everything's about moving forward. Everything's about being post-slavery, post this, you move forward. And then all of those things from the past come back and haunt you, or you haven't resolved them. And I think that's why we're in a time with America and the world where all of the stuff we wanted to forget and pretend didn't exist, it comes back, because it doesn't go away. And that's the same with your ancestors. Your ancestors are always with you. Some are good and some are bad, but you have to acknowledge that. So going back to places like the South always reminded me of that and connected me with that, so that I know that by acknowledging and connecting with that, that will enable me to move forward and move into the future. I don't know. Did I answer your question or did I go on tangent?
No,
Go on
you
a tangent.
you absolutely did. You did, and you actually brought us to our next question, and that is the future. And you mentioned that the Africans in Egypt and all the other places, Aswana, they felt as though they were vessels. They were communicating messages through their art. And I just want to ask, what are your thoughts about the future of Black art? And you make mention that, in today's time, it seems as though we are more committed to, forward thinking and technology. And you even said that you actually want to incorporate digital components to your artwork. There's this new thing now called NFTs, and there are
Hmm.
artists who are making a name for themselves through their social media presence. How do you feel about the future of Black art, and are there any emerging artists that you have your eye on today that you're like, okay, yes, they're going to take the baton and they're going to keep it moving forward? What are your thoughts on
Yes,
that?
yes. So to answer one question, so I think in the future, I think the future is going to be dictated by the environmental things that are happening, that I'm watching in the world right now. This whole thing with environmental and global warming and environmental justice, is really, it's heating up obviously because of all the natural disasters, which I hate to say has to happen for people to really get out of this old rut that they're in. And I'm not a person that want to see anybody suffer. I don't want to see people suffer, but I do want to see people wake up. So I think the future is going to be more and more environmental things that people have to address. With that, I think that is going to impact and change how we use art. And I think it's going to bring us back again, like the Sankofa bird, bringing us back to the past so we can move forward. Going back to the past, if you talk about art in an African aspect, there was no such thing as art. It was everything that was created in Africa with an African, I said, really, I guess with an African way of thinking, was about creating utilitarian things of beauty. You did not produce something that would just hang in a museum and so people could look at it and maybe feel a certain way or whatever, or get emotions from it or whatever. It was much more than that. These people were producing things that recorded their lineage, that would go back sometimes thousands of years. They could look at a sculpture, look at a piece, and know that they were a part of that lineage. They also knew that these were recordings of their ancestors. And also in parts of Africa, we dealt with oral history. So many legends, stories, things of gods, goddesses, etc., had to be recorded somehow, and the art became that. Those sculptures, those carved pieces, those spoons, those objects, all were reminders of that oral history. Very important. And they also produced sacred objects that would be used to heal people. People may think that's crazy, but there were certain things that were literally produced for that. So as the future goes on, I think we're going to have to really deal with those things. We're going to have to get into that. If people, for example, if storms keep continuing and people are in positions where they're losing their homes and losing certain things, you know, it's going to really shape how people are going to deal with things. They may have to start building these artful things that they live in that are not based off of the Western traditional way of doing something. They may have to get into producing something that they could pass down to another generation of people, something, an object, whatever that is, especially if everything's lost in a storm or in a disaster. You're going to have to do that. You're also going to have to use your art as a practice to bring community together. That's what we used to do. So like, for example, quilting. Quilting was a thing where people would come together. The whole community would produce those quilts and it would bring people together. So it wasn't just we're making this quilt, again, just to hang in a museum. It was about all of us are coming together, sitting at a table. We all are adding to this thing and we're telling our story and we're adding those stories and we're communicating and we're sharing all of this information, which gets embedded into the work. And then that's passed down to the next person or the next generation. So it becomes a sacred object. I believe we are heading in that direction. Now, I don't know how long it's going to take, but I really feel eventually that is where the direction of art, in particular Black art, is going to go. It can't just be, I feel, look, I love selling my art. I think it's great. I'm so happy to see the prices of art going for what they're going for, in particular African American art, because it never would sell for any really the prices that it deserves. So I'm happy we're in a time where that's taking place. But I still say art is limited under a monetary system. There is so much more to art that we haven't even tapped into as far as the spiritual components of art, as far as the metaphysical aspects of art. Those things, most people, a lot of people are not even thinking about. And they're focusing on just the monetary things. So that's just a one dimension. So now I'm saying the future can give us the opportunities for maybe 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions in art, 5, 12 dimensions of art. It can go so much beyond just the monetary aspects of producing art. That's what I feel the future is going to hold for us. Um, oh, I'm sorry.
You're just fine. I'm listening to you.
Mhm.
You were going to say?
Now, as far as different artists that are, there are some young artists that I can think of that are really, I think, trying to push the envelope. They're not well known. They're not well known artists. They're different people that I could just think of, that I just think of off the top of my head, that are doing things with the community art that I really feel are they're really pushing art to another level. There's a gentleman, he just popped in my head, K Dub. There's a guy out here named K Dub. K Dub does his art where he produces skateboards and produces objects of art that people can use for travel and movement, and bringing, he goes into communities where it could be gang violence or certain things happening, and get these kids, instead of focusing on the violence, to produce these art objects or these skateboards or these objects of transportation and travel, and produce these things and tell their stories through it. And so I think, things like that where you're connecting into the community, I think it's really important. I'm gonna again. I'm not just trying to shout out all the time, but I'm gonna say Anthony McKissick. I think he's doing some really innovative work with the things that he's producing. Very innovative stuff. He's going into the heart of the community. He at times can make people very uncomfortable because he brings up the good and the bad, and he can go in deep into the core of the Black community and express those things, and is very much connected in that. And I think that's really important. And so, I feel like that's very innovative in itself. And he understands that it's important to record those stories, those things that we don't want to see, those storefront churches that people may not want to go to, or those little juke joints in places that people are embarrassed to say they went to. Those are the things he records, and he really sees the value in it. Um, so I think it's really important. So those are just a few people that I can think of. There are many more. I feel bad that I'm leaving anybody out. If I'm trying to think of some more people. There's just so many people that I can think of that are really pushing things towards the future. Um, so yeah, I think that's it. That answers my question with that one.
Yes, and I love your vision because, you know, I read, different biographies. I enjoy documentary films. The reason I became a public historian was because I saw the stage play FEMA. I said FEMA. I was looking up FEMA as you were talking about, environmental and natural disasters. And I'm like, dang, I could imagine, artists going down with the FEMA, cleanup crews and, obtaining some of those objects and reinterpreting or, making new use of that material instead of just taking it to a trash dump or
Yes.
however they process that stuff. But Fela, I became a public historian after seeing the stage play Fela because I was like, okay, I just sat here for an hour and some change, and I had a beautiful experience, and I learned about the wonderful artist Fela Kuti in that
Yes.
process and his contributions to civil rights. And I said, if somebody can write a stage play and educate me like this, I too want to enter the world of public history so that I can use different ways of educating people about culture and history and heritage. So I definitely am championing all that you do, and I want to stay abreast of everything that you have coming up in the future. Again, William Rhodes is the co-founder of the 3.9 Arts Collective. William, can you give the listeners your website, your social media handles, all the good ways for us to, one, stay in touch, to learn about all of the exhibitions that you are involved with in the future, and then of course you have that budget, you want to add some beautiful artwork to your home, to your personal collection. How can we learn about or find out how to purchase work from you and all that too? So again, website, socials, how do we stay connected, William?
Yes. So my website is William Rhodes Art at .com, and that's WILLIAMRHODESART.com. On Facebook, it's just William Rhodes Art. And I also would love for you to stay connected because I have an exciting show with this artist by the name of Ben Jones. He is a artist who was integral in the whole Black arts movement of the 1960s. It's his work, my work, and we are in a book. And you could purchase the book either on Amazon, or you can contact me directly and purchase the book. It's a beautiful book. Half of it is my work, half of it is Ben Jones. And if you'd like, you can email me as well. And that is williamrhodesart@gmail.com. So, and we have an exhibition which is also has a virtual link talking about technology. So at the day of our opening, which will be October 8th, people can actually click on the link. They can actually see us, and we're going to have a Q&A session, but you get to see the work. You get to see the reception in San Francisco. It's going to be at the California Institute of Integral Studies on October 8th. So please reach out to me. I'd love to connect with you. And if you want that book, I'd love for you to get that book. And I could sign it for you too.
Awesome, William. I have the book in my possession. It's beautiful. Thank you for this. And you brought up environmental art as a response to environmental challenges, and I think that for me is one of the most grateful. One of the things that I'm most grateful about coming out of the pandemic is art and different programs becoming virtually accessible. I mean,
Yes.
before the pandemic, I would look at different calendars in different cities. I'm like, oh, I wish I could be in DC right now, or I wish I could be in San Francisco right now to, go to this event on Tuesday. But the pandemic with, Zoom and all the other technologies has really made it so that we can experience a William Rhodes in real life without having to be in northern California to embrace that opportunity. So I am very, very grateful for all of the ideas that you've shared with us in the latter part of the interview. I'm very grateful to be able to see and learn from your art and see all the stories, and I'm going to keep digging into to learn more, and maybe we can have this conversation again in the future. William, what you
I
think
would
about
love
that?
that. Oh, I would love it. It was fabulous. Thank you for thinking of me with this interview, and it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Hmm.
And I know one thing, I'm going to definitely shout out to all of my people, and I'm going to put it out with my emails to please visit blackhistory.com. So, folks out there, please visit blackhistory.com. It's really important, and it's a great project that you're doing.
I appreciate that. I really do.